In China, two ancient cities share a common past. Unchanged for centuries, Wuzhen is called the Venice of the East. Built on the greatest water trade route of the ancient world. And just down the river is Shanghai. Once a small trading port, Shanghai is now one of the nation's biggest cities, a declaration of China becoming an economic superpower. Two cities, one a window into the past, the other a vision of China's future. China's ancient civilization was built on water, a network of rivers and canals that once linked the empire. Today, water links two towns, one old and one very new. Shanghai is rapidly becoming the biggest city in China. It has more skyscrapers than New York City and twice as many people. Shanghai's skyline stands as a testament of China's explosive growth. In just 3 decades, Shanghai's population has nearly doubled, and the city has been physically transformed by high-rises and highways. The city already contains 9 of the top 100 tallest buildings on the planet, and many more are on their way up. The Shanghai World Financial Center is the tallest building in China. Topped with a distinctive rectangular opening, it casts a unique shadow across the city. No other city has such a rapidly evolving skyline. But in Shanghai, tall buildings are not the only engineering marvels. Every day, 2 million cars and trucks travel in and out of the city over some of the 4,000 bridges in Shanghai. The Lupu Bridge is the world's longest steel arch bridge, with a central span that soars 1,800 feet over the Huangpu River. There is so much traffic in the city that multi-laned, multi-tiered highways have become a Shanghai specialty. The rapid rise of these engineering achievements is stunning. Where once there were only run-down houses and farms, there now stands a new financial district, nicknamed China's Manhattan. It took New York City more than a century to achieve its dramatic skyline. The new Shanghai skyline emerged in little more than a decade. And And it all started with a river. More than 1,000 years ago, Shanghai was a small fishing village built at the mouth of the longest river in China, the Yangtze. In Shanghai, the locals call the town Hu for short, as Hu was the Chinese word for the estuary of a big river. Sitting at the mouth of the Yangtze, Shanghai was perfectly positioned to become the main artery into the heart of China for trade and commerce. Today, it's possible to look back into Shanghai's past by visiting one of the nation's most extraordinary ancient towns. Just 80 miles upstream from Shanghai is the trading town of Wuzhen. While Shanghai accelerated into the future, Wuzhen remains as a living fossil, a reminder of what life was like in a trading town 1,000 years ago. Like Shanghai, Wuzhen was built around water and became famous as the Venice of the East. Wuzhen lies at the heart of a network of rivers and waterways that spread north, south, and west across ancient China. Canals divide the town into separate districts, connected by 11 tiny stone bridges. Two rivers surround Wuzhen, linking the narrow man-made canals to the wider waterways of China. At its peak, Wuzhen had more than 10,000 households. Today, about 600 families still call Wuzhen home, and their lifestyles have changed little in 300 years. Locals build their houses over the water because everything they need literally floats past their front door. Residents simply lean out their windows to buy fruit and vegetables from boats carrying produce from neighboring water towns. The houses, shops, and warehouses that line the canals are some of the best preserved examples of ancient architecture in all of China. Most of the wooden buildings are painted dark brown. That's because the houses are constructed using timber that's wonderfully water resistant, but has a problem with woodworm. So for generations, people have treated the timber by painting it with a dark brown oil. In Chinese, Wuzhen literally means small brown town, but it's actually named after an ancient military commander. Having fought a famous battle in the region, General Wu was buried in the town that now bears his name. But it wasn't just architecture that made Wuzhen special. The trading town was once the epicenter of arts and culture in southeast China. The canals of Wuzhen even inspired an entirely new style of music. The ancient water town of Wuzhen has been nominated as a World Heritage Site because so much of its remarkable culture and industry has been preserved. The cobblestone lanes are crowded with visitors seeking to capture a glimpse of China's past. Tradition is still very much alive in Wuzhen. The town is full of artists and artisans, and performers singing songs unique to the region. The flower drum opera is an ancient form of Chinese song. The opera was once a kind of satirical variety show. The songs are about local people and the surrounding countryside. Their love affairs, family feuds, and ancient folk tales are all built into the opera. It's said the opera began at a time when devastating floods once drove musicians from their homes. Forced to beg on the street, they sat in pairs, beating a drum and singing the stories of their homes and history. Wuzhen's unique heritage was built around its waterways. Boats from all across China went past Wuzhen, bringing political news and revolutionary ideas. Merchants grew wealthy, trading everything from food to fabric. Wuzhen was famous for making the finest fabrics in the Chinese Empire, and the tradition continues today. Hung out to dry on high wooden beams, plain calico cloth is transformed using natural dyes unique to the Wuzhen region. Printed with designs inspired from the surrounding countryside, flowers, fields, and rivers, the bright, cheerful fabric is used mostly as tablecloths and curtains. The colorful calico cloth is made from the plain woven fibers of the cotton plant. But Wuzhen also produces fabrics that are far more luxurious. One sumptuous cloth was interwoven with golden thread and worn only by emperors, wealthy warlords, and noblemen. The story of its creation began with a cup of tea. It's said the wife of Huang Di, legendary founder of China, was drinking tea under a mulberry bush. She was watching a caterpillar spinning itself into a cocoon when it fell into her cup. In the hot liquid, the cocoon unraveled into long, soft threads. And that's when she discovered how to make silk. "6,000 years later, and artisans in Wuzhen still use traditional techniques to extract silk fibers. Instead of soaking in a cup of tea, the cocoons of the silkworm caterpillar are boiled over an open fire and stirred to loosen the fibers. Since the first empress discovered the secret of silk, making the fabric has been a job exclusively for women. For generations, daughters, mothers, and grandmothers spent their day boiling cocoons, then hand spinning and weaving the silk. More recently, the process has become mechanized. Giant industrial machines unwind the raw cocoon silk onto spools, ready for weaving. The basic process remains the same. Boiling water is still used to loosen a cocoon, and the machine unravels a strand of silk, barely the width of a human hair. It takes 5,500 cocoons to make just 2 pounds of silk. Each cocoon contains nearly 1,000 yards of silk fiber, and it takes 5 fibers twisted together to form one thread that can be woven into silk fabric. In Wuzhen, manufacturers once revolutionized the weaving of silk. The weaving machines in this silk factory were state-of-the-art technology when they were installed in 1925. Each loom has 2,000 working parts and over 100 different functions. They were specially designed to make brocade, a heavy silk fabric patterned with intricate embroidery. Nearly a century later, and they're still the best way to make silk brocade in China. Even so, it's an extremely slow process. A piece of brocade increases in size by just 3 inches a day. It can take up to 100 days to make just one silk shawl. The process of turning silkworm cocoons into fabric was so complicated and labor-intensive, it's no wonder silk became one of the greatest commodities of the ancient world. Silk was once worth its weight in gold. It was such a vital part of the economy that 230 of the 5,000 most common characters in the Mandarin alphabet have silk as their key. For more than 2,000 years, the process was kept secret. The penalty for smuggling silkworm eggs or cocoons out of the country was death. Eventually, the mysteries of silk making spread with Chinese immigrants out of Asia and into the West. Yet Wuzhen retained its reputation as one of the world's finest producers of silk. Another product made in Wuzhen also became popular around the globe. Underneath these conical bamboo lids is a smelly concoction of fermenting yeast, wheat, and soybeans. After 6 months baking in the hot sun inside shallow ceramic pots, the mixture is transformed into salty soy sauce. This factory in the ancient canal town of Wuzhen has been making and storing soy sauce using the same process for 150 years. But there was a time when soy sauce was actually made with fish. In ancient China, salt was incredibly expensive. But people discovered they could get a salty flavor from a sauce made from fermented fish. According to legend, someone once threw in some soybeans as a filler. Before long, the inexpensive bean sauce was so popular, fish was dropped altogether from the recipe. The soybeans used to make the sauce can be yellow, green, brown, purple, black, or spotted. And Chinese cooking makes a great distinction between the varieties. But soy sauce is not the only famous liquid made in Wuzhen. In China, many believe that drinking encourages creativity. Almost all of the nation's great writers and painters were thought to love their liquor, so aspiring artists also search for inspiration inside a bottle. In Wuzhen, the drink of choice is rice wine, made from a 1,000-year-old recipe. This factory is famous for producing sweet Wuzhen wine. To make the wine, sticky rice is cooked until it's soft, then cooled with cold water. Winemakers in Wuzhen use only the purest water from the bottom of an ancient well. Depending on its mineral content, water can change the flavor of the wine, and Wuzhen is famous for producing a sweet, clear liquor. After adding a little flour and yeast, the fermentation process begins beneath the straw lids. After a few weeks, the rice is removed, and the remaining liquid is distilled into wine. Stored in ceramic urns, the locals call it three white wine, from the white rice, white flour, and white water. Today, people still associate drinking three white wine with the arts and literature. But Wuzhen's most popular beverage was tea. Like the local diner, The tea house was an important place to hear local gossip and the news of the day. But according to legend, the very first tea house in Wuzhen was not a success. The young owner was losing business after accidentally serving his customers a brew made from poisonous leaves. He decided the only way to bring back his clientele was to find a legendary tea that grew in the hills. But en route, he met an old man on the road, writhing in agony. When the tea house owner helped save his life by finding some healing herbs, the old man was so grateful, he decided to share the secrets of his life's work. And since the old man was a revered tea master, the tea house in Wuzhen was soon famous for serving the best tea in China. In its prime, Wuzhen had more than 100 tea houses. They were the favorite meeting place of artists, poets, and musicians who came to discuss their work. Soon, Wuzhen was more than just a market town. With so many intellectuals gathering around the teapot, it became known as a place of refined society. Wuzhen owed its success to the rivers and canals that were the lifeblood of ancient China. The town was perfectly positioned to take advantage of the bounties that came from the water. Especially when, 1,500 years ago, an emperor dreamed of connecting all the canals and rivers in China with a single waterway. It was a dream that would change the ancient empire forever. As Wuzhen is nicknamed the Venice of the East, it's hardly surprising the ancient water town has a long and illustrious history of boat building. Archaeological evidence suggests the original inhabitants built their boats on the banks of the river, just as the locals do today. The remains of a wooden boat were recently discovered near Wuzhen and are estimated to be 7,500 years old. Today, shipyards in Wuzhen still construct sampans, the flat-bottom boats without a keel, traditionally propelled by an oar or a sail. Chinese boat builders pioneered many different designs, including the scull rudder. This innovative combination of oar and rudder simultaneously propels and steers the flat-bottom boats. Even more impressive was the design of a new waterway. A succession of Chinese emperors created the biggest canal the world had ever seen. To control a unified Chinese empire, the emperors wanted to connect all the nation's rivers and lakes to provide a single thoroughfare for merchants, sailors, and fishermen. In the 6th century, 5.5 million people were set to work digging a canal, linking the fertile Yangtze Valley to the cities in the north. By the time it was finished, the Grand Canal was an engineering marvel on the scale of the Great Wall of China. Wuzhen was built directly onto the enormous watery highway stretching 1,100 miles across China. By taking the Grand Canal, merchants and sailors could avoid the bad weather and pirates that plagued the open ocean. The Grand Canal was the safest way to move food from the rich agricultural lands in the south to the heavily populated cities in the north. Trade from the Grand Canal provided riches for every town along its length. But just maintaining the massive waterway was an epic undertaking. More than 11,000 grain barges, crewed by 121,000 soldiers and officers, traveled north from the fertile fields of the Yangtze Valley. By the mid-15th century, the Ming Dynasty employed 47,000 full-time laborers to maintain the Grand Canal. Today, most of the Grand Canal has been filled in, but the 310-mile section around Wuzhen is still in constant use. Barges carry wood chips, steel, and other building materials along the canal out to the Yangtze River and on to Shanghai. The contrast between the two trading towns, ancient Wuzhen and modern Shanghai, could not be more extreme. The second longest cross-sea bridge in the world, extending 20 miles into the ocean, connects mainland Shanghai with the offshore islands that have been transformed into Yangshan deep-water port. The original port of Shanghai was just too small and too shallow to cope with the sheer volume of goods passing through its harbor. So, in 2001, the government decided to build something bigger. In 2010, Shanghai surpassed Singapore to become the world's busiest trading port. More than 650 million tons of goods pass through the port each year, with more than 5,000 container trucks arriving at the port every day. Yangshan's deep water allows the world's biggest container ships to come calling. With 50 berths extending more than 30 miles, Over 800 vessels pass through the port in a month. Shanghai has transformed the global shipping market. Its productivity and efficiency surpasses every other port in the world. But the revolution on the water is nothing compared to what happened to Shanghai on the land. The Wangpu River separates old and new Shanghai. On the west bank, the waterfront is dominated by colonial architecture built after the 1920s. But across the river is the futuristic skyline of the Pudong district, the center of Shanghai's economic boom. Pudong means east of the river, and in the middle of the 20th century, the district was muddy farmland. But an explosion of building and construction has transformed it into a global financial center. Between 1990 and 2004, more than 6,700 new buildings over 11 stories high were built in Shanghai. The biggest of them all is the Shanghai World Financial Center. Completed in 2007, it was the second tallest building in the world, standing 1,614 feet high. It's still China's tallest building. For now. Covered in 155,000 square feet of glass, it takes 3 months to wash the building's facade, a job that has unique occupational hazards. In summer, the glass gets so hot, washing water immediately evaporates, while in winter, the water freezes to the glass. It can be snowing on the 100th floor and at the same time, raining on the 46th. The glass outside the observation deck is cleaned every 2 weeks. The Shanghai World Financial Center has the highest viewing platform in the world, more than 1,500 feet above the city. And the views are sensational. The city has become a hub for international architectural designers, racing to create the next engineering megastructure. More monuments to Shanghai's extreme corporate power are appearing all the time. These are the foundations of the biggest of them all. The Shanghai Tower will eventually rise 2,073 feet into the air, making it the tallest building in China. The phenomenal pace of the growth of Shanghai is an engine driving the nation's economy. China currently uses twice as much steel as the United States, Europe, and Japan combined. All this massive construction is no accident. In the 1990s, Shanghai was chosen by the Chinese government to spearhead the nation into the 21st century. A plan was conceived, envisioning 3 super tall buildings, each higher than the next, rising above Shanghai. It was hard to imagine such a radical transformation of a city. So back in 2002, the Shanghai Urban Planning Center built a model of their city of the future. "30 years ago, the skyscrapers towering above the east bank of the Huangpu River didn't exist. And it's not just the Pudong financial district that has been transformed. To allow for the predicted population expansion, in the last decade, 9 new satellite cities have been created on the outskirts of Shanghai. Shanghai is set to become a megacity, unlike anything the world has ever seen. The ceaseless ambition and growth of China's most modern metropolis is reflected in the futuristic light show of Shanghai's iconic skyline. Shanghai is obsessed with light. Fluorescent patterns flicker up and down the skyscrapers, and the high-rises that don't light up are covered with enormous screens flashing digital advertisements. Even the undersides of bridges are dramatically lit with ultraviolet lights. A drive through the city is like entering a futuristic world lifted from the pages of science fiction. China is experiencing one of the most massive urbanizations in human history. By 2015, more than 700 million people will live in China's cities and towns. For the first time in the nation's 5,000-year history, the number of urban dwellers will overtake the rural population. Shanghai leads the way, with an estimated 300,000 newcomers each year, all hoping to share in the economic boom. Shanghai is predicted to have a population of 22.5 million people by the year 2020. Almost overnight, the once humble trading port has been transformed into a megacity of engineering marvels. Shanghai has reinvented the idea of China's ancient water towns, accelerating them into the future. When Shanghai was chosen to be the industrial, economic, and financial superpower of modern China, the city was called the Dragon's Head, leading the nation into the 21st century. Today, the dragon's eyes are still on the horizon, fixed firmly upon the future of the nation.